Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me at this late session of the RiskEurope, the second day. Let's hope we close this with a little bang. I'm trying to make this as engaging as possible. And what I'd like to do is, in case you've not heard about enterprise-wide AI risk management, there's a reason for that, because this is the first time that I'm actually publicly or in a semi-public form introducing this new concept and idea. What I'd like to do is, over the next 30 minutes or so, I would like to give you an introduction of my thinking behind this, in particular the origins, the components that feed into that, some of the AI risk mitigants that have been considered, black AI swans, and then the question really is, where do we go from here? What's next? Now, before I do that, I'd like to understand a little bit more about you, the audience, and in order to do that, you've all got voting devices with you. If you haven't got the voting devices with you, please raise your hand now. Very good, perfect. You now all got voting devices. So that seems to be working. The first question I want to ask you is, in terms of AI adoption, how many of you, and specifically your firms, organizations, have adopted artificial intelligence in your operations, in your business, in your dealing with customers, anywhere throughout the organization? If you could use your voting device, please, and give me a hand sign. Fantastic. So I would say probably maybe 90%, maybe a little bit more. That's good. And I guess AI is everywhere these days. Now, let me then ask you the second question, which is probably the more important one. From a risk management perspective, who of you and your firms have implemented a fully functioning, robust, scalable enterprise risk management framework that is capable of dealing with all the risks that are coming out of the usage of AI in your day-to-day business? Could I get some hands, please? Oh, one. That's fantastic, but even the one is not particularly sure. So we got 90%, 95% of representatives from organizations here today who use AI as part of your day-to-day business, but almost none of them, apart from the, that's probably the outlier over there, the lady in the audience, she says a little bit maybe. So the question is then, of course, what are we going to do about it? And today's session is about that. Before I go into that, I've learned a little bit about you now. I think the crucial piece is, the question is then for me, or maybe for you, why is this guy standing here? What gives him the insights? Because, you know, AI is fairly new. It's been around for some time. So my name is Markus Krebsz. I'm a risk management expert, I guess. I've certainly been around, more than 30 years experience in banking and financial services, more than 25 years by now probably in risk management. And as part of this, I do like to play around with frameworks. So back in 2013, 2016, when the Financial Conduct Authority arrived in the UK, I was trying to decipher what they are actually going to do from a conduct risk perspective. And some people in the audience will know this at very detailed level. There wasn't a lot out there, and I developed this conduct risk paradigm, which was focused initially on banks and financial institutions only. In 2017, as part of my work with the United Nations, and by the way, everything I'm saying here today is in a personal capacity. I'm not representing the UN in any form or shape or way, which allows me to be a little bit more candid with all of you, I guess. As part of this work, I then rolled out what I call the Universal Conduct Risk Paradigm that is still sitting on the UN website. That was followed in 2023 by what I call HiPACA, the Human AI Paradigm for Conducts, Ethics and Risk, because there was increasingly the use of AI. And then I also do quite a bit of work with, and some people in the audience will notice I'm smiling now, drones. So I'm a drone pilot, but I'm also beta tester for a robotics company who develops drones such as these two that are up there. And as part of this work, I've very quickly understood and realized how much artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly more autonomous, taking agency over our lives. And as part of this work, over the last 5 years, a little bit more by now, I've developed the United Nations and authored the United Nations Common Regulatory Arrangement and AI Declaration with a very specific focus on the regulatory compliance of products and services with embedded AI systems. Now, this is very wide and very generic. There's only two things that are not included in that particular definition. The first one is self-driving cars, because there's a separate UN directive covering that. And the second one is autonomous weapons, because the UN can't agree on that, and that's all done as part of national defense strategies. Now, that is the participatory policy development work I've been doing. And as part of this, I've been thinking there must be another side to this stick, because we got the UN, we got the governments, we got the NGOs. But what about the organizations? What about the corporates? What about the enterprises? What about all the companies that want to use and implement AI with their businesses? What are they going to do about all of that? Now, as part of this, I thought, okay, we haven't got the people, we haven't got the resources, we haven't got the knowledge, but what we do have, certainly as traditional risk managers in this space, we have got the frameworks, there's components out there, there are tools that are really valuable, detailed, and usable. And the ones that came to mind are, come to them in a minute. The first one is actually, as an organization, you need to have some key strategic pillars in place. Without those, don't even go down the route. And as we go through that, I'm not going to ask you now, because that might be a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to suggest what these are, and you can then go through this list in your head and realize whether or not your organization is actually using these. So I call them key strategic pillars, but in my mind, they are actually assumptions that this is already being done with you in your organization. If it's not being done, then you need to do this before you actually think about implementing any kind of AI. The second pillar, and the risk managers here, particularly the traditional risk managers, will recognize where this is coming from and what this is. It's the traditional risk management frameworks, the ERMs, the COSOs, the ISO 31000s, the integrated risk under OSEC, all the kind of stuff that until now has covered the traditional enterprise risk management within a firm. You could argue everything that doesn't actually include AI right now. But then we have to augment that, because at the moment, in my mind and for my work, there's something missing. And I can see some heads nodding here quite strongly. So what can we do to augment that without reinventing the wheel? Now, I done a lot of research as part of the work I've done for the UN and looked at different type of risk taxonomies, control taxonomies, information registers that is out there. The one I keep coming back is the MIT AI risk taxonomy. And I'll explain a little bit more in a minute why I think that is probably at this point in time, and has been for a while, the most suitable one. And just as a disclaimer, I've contributed to some of that as well more recently, because I think it is so good that it's worthwhile pursuing. And then thirdly, I think there's another element here which has been around for a while. You will all be familiar with the Rumsfeld matrix, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and that kind of stuff around black swans. But the black swans are taking a new dimension now within the AI space. There's elements that don't exist with the traditional black swans that should also be taken account. And as part of that, I've extended this framework with these AI swans. Now, first of all, the key strategic pillars in my mind that are very, very important. The first one is a strategic alignment you as an organization need to understand what's our problem, why do we need AI as a solution, and then related to that, a needs assessment. Because you might actually conclude we don't need any AI in our business. And congratulations if you come to that conclusion. That's a very strong point, and that might actually put you in a much more competitive position further down the line. I know some people here probably won't like me saying that, but I think that is the truth. So some of you might not ever need AI within your firm. I don't know if some of you read in the City AM this morning that a lot of banks, financial institutions, other firms are now considering to replace the first line of defense with AI. I think, and by using agentic AI kind of stuff, I think that is very, very dangerous path to go down, and I personally would not recommend that. The second one is organizational readiness. I mean, we got all these people here, we're all talking about AI. Everyone these days is an AI expert, but do you have the coders? Do you have the psychologists within the organization? Do you have the people, the out-the-box thinkers? Do you have the outliers? Do you have the challengers that are able to both go to your board and your management and challenge them on these ideas and say, actually, no, we shouldn't be doing this. So culturally, there's a lot of needed to do that. And from an organizational readiness perspective, you need to keep that in mind. Closely related to that, the best AI tool isn't going to do anything other than a Google if you haven't got your proprietary database. If you've got the data, the quality and the capabilities to manage all this from a security perspective, a data privacy perspective, then yes, by all means explore that. But if your data is patchy, you've got a lot of gaps, you're missing data points, AI potentially won't be able to help you with that either. And bearing in mind, this is all assumptions at the moment. This is all the pillars. We're not talking about the actual framework yet. Risk tolerance and prioritization. I've spoken to an insurance company last year, and their CEO was very keen on doing AI because everyone else is doing AI. And then he asked his management team to come up with 25 use cases of how we could use AI. Actually, you're an insurance company. You need to more worry about the data, the historical data, the statistics, the data points, the mathematics, rather than doing stuff with AI. And I walked away from that because it became to the point where they were suffering serious FOMO at the management level, and you can't just provide that to them. In fact, you should caution them about that particular approach. Which then brings me to governance and accountability. If you're using AI within your organization, you need to think about new forms of governance. You need to think about things like what For Humanity is very much preaching out there. Things like an ethics committee, an ethics officer. You need to have an AI committee, but you also should think about traditional ways of managing these new models. That means you need to have a model risk management. You need to have a model validation team. You need to have policies and procedures in place. I can't remember how many times I talked to companies. They say, oh, we're using AI now to do this stuff. I said, fantastic. Have you got a solid AI policy? No? What for? We got Gemini. That comes with our system. It's all baked in now. We got Copilot. I don't have to worry about any of that. Yes, you absolutely have to. And then finally, if you want to do this, you need to take a through the life cycle approach. That means you start at the top there with the strategic decision when you think about implementing AI within your firm. And then you work your way through the whole production cycle, development, implementation. And guess what? Once you handed all your data, all your proprietary stuff over, that's sitting with a third-party provider, an AI firm in the cloud, if anything goes wrong with that, it'll be very, very difficult potentially to reclaim that. You will know OpenAI, for instance, there have been legal cases. They're not allowed to delete any data ever and forever. Now, that is very scary as an organization, and I would caution to do that sort of thing. That then brings me to the traditional enterprise risk management framework and the vision of management boards wanting to implement AI within the organization. Now, the only way you can bridge that gap between the old world here and the new world there is by thinking about how you can overcome these challenges and by keeping your people really, really busy. The core here is the human. The human is playing the major role in it. And the biggest problem with AI isn't the technology. The biggest problem is humans. You can see now, I told you at the introduction, my background is a lot of conduct risk. It comes about the behavior, what people are doing, how they're approaching this whole theme. But if you're ready to do that, and if you feel you can overcome that challenge, then what you could be doing is you could be looking at augmenting traditional enterprise risk management approaches by, for instance, and you don't have to use the MIT AI risk taxonomy, but it is very, very good for several reasons, and they're all in the boxes here. First one is MIT spent a lot of time doing research and trying to figure out from the various papers, both academic and technical, what frameworks are out there. And they came up with currently, initially it was about 35, then it was 40 something odd. Now it's 65 AI risk frameworks. More importantly, they make all of this available to use, if you like, to download and play around with it. And they got a database of 1,600 at the moment, AI risks. Now the interesting thing is, this database could easily be a little bit repurposed, if you like, as a traditional risk register, but with a focus on AI risks. It's all there. You don't have to get a new team who comes up with all this stuff. The templates are there. The models are there. What's currently not there is combining it in a humanly intelligent way so you can use it within your organization. Now, as part of the taxonomies that MIT Risk offers as part of the risk repository paper, there's the casual taxonomy, which is interesting, probably more for researchers, because it looks at incidents, whether they were deliberately, not deliberately, and so on. The one I'm focusing on here with today's introduction of enterprise-wide AI risk management is actually the domain taxonomy, which is 7 domains, 24 subdomains now. Initially it was 23, they've extended that earlier in the year. And that means you can basically augment, doesn't matter if it's COSO or ISO or OSEC, you can augment your existing enterprise-wide risk management with a focus on AI by implementing this, and it becomes all of a sudden holistic. Now, it's probably a bit of a mental challenge if you're in an organization, whatever it is, this applies to all sectors, when you all of a sudden have to think about things like discrimination and toxicity, bias ultimately. Privacy, security, that should be part of cybersecurity measures anyway. Misinformation. If your organization is pushing out stuff there, we haven't got anyone from the BBC here at the moment, and it's just made up, whether by AI or by AI and some humans using that, you got to be very mindful of the risks that are relating to that. Reputational risk. You could be done for libel and so on. Malicious actors and misuse. I think that's an important one because it's often underestimated how many times companies have already been attacked from a cybersecurity angle, but by using prompt injection, by trying out some data drift methodology, by basically messing up your proprietary database with getting things in that you otherwise couldn't get in. And there's easy ways to do that. Only the other day I saw in Gmail, you can send someone a Gmail. If they've got that enabled, you can inject a little prompt in that email and all of a sudden you can mess up your company's database. Someone can gain access where, and I'm also an ethical hacker, traditionally you wouldn't have been able to do that. Now you don't even need a hacker anymore. You can have hacking as a service in the internet. If you search for it, use some prompt injection protocols and get into the company. And then finally, we will be used to the environmental stuff, the ESG, that's the 6.6 at the bottom here. But all the other things, the socio-economic impact of using AI, whether it's about competitive dynamics or power concentrations, these are multifacets that previously organizations didn't have to consider. But if you're using AI, and you told me at the beginning, most of you are, or your firms are, you should be considering those. Even if you just think about them once and conclude internally, actually, I don't have to worry about it. It's all good. That's fine. But you should have done that exercise. You should have done an initial risk assessment, an impact assessment. You should have thought about where your data is going to go and who is going to access it and what people are able to do with it. That triangle at the top here is important because this is such a dynamic area. It's very difficult to keep track of. You've seen the MIT taxonomy has already evolved. There's so much dynamism going on there. So if you build a modular framework like this one, you can tap into what's already out there. You don't have to scratch your own head, and you can simply try to combine them in a humanly intelligent way. Also, as part of the MIT risk taxonomy, there's also a control taxonomy. The only challenge here, I would say right now, is the controls are not necessarily linked to the risks. I understand MIT is working on that. That will require some additional research. But you can see already from their analysis, there's 831 controls they have identified. The majority of them are things like risk management, testing and auditing, data governance, monitoring, and risk disclosure. But you can see they are in this nice, beautiful quadrant where you have governance and oversight, and that's quite a big chunk still on its own. You got the technical security stuff, which you would expect if you use generative models, if you have model cards and need to look after those. Transparency and accountability. We always talk about transparent AI and explainable AI, but what are the actual controls you should be putting in place so you're able to manage, monitor and measure all of this? And the transparency, accountability, there's plenty of here. And then operational processes. In the traditional world, you could argue this is probably similar to operational risk, but it's operational risk in relation to the usage and deployment of AI within your organization. Oh, and there's a few on here as well that they couldn't put into any category. I put them there because if there's any quants in here, they come to me after, say, I added this up, this doesn't work out. So just for, again, you know, this is all dynamic, so you have to be mindful of that. So let's go a little bit dark then. The black swans. You will be familiar with black swans, not just since the global financial crisis, but probably before already. They have got some defining characteristics: extreme rarity, massive impact, and usually in hindsight, they would have been retrospectively predictable. Now, you could argue this is what has informed Donald Rumsfeld with the Rumsfeld matrix, the known knowns, unknown unknowns. We need to move a little bit away from that. And the reason for that is AI as a technology that very quickly adjusts, sometimes autonomously, takes over new dimensions of unpredictability. And that means you've got emergent behaviors, you've got a compound effect now of the unknown unknowns, and I don't even know what you would call those, and you got accelerated cascading effects as well you need to take into account when deploying these technologies. So it's an add-on to the enterprise-wide AI risk management framework, but it's one from a mindful exercise you should certainly be doing. So I guess the question is then, at this point, what's next? Where do we go from here? And what comes to mind from my perspective, particularly from a conduct risk perspective, is as well, doing nothing is not an option. or certainly not a viable option, because if you make the decision, you don't have to do anything. That will be a decision that someone within your organization took at some point. Reinventing the wheel, as we saw earlier, is unnecessary because you got key strategic pillars that are out there. You've got existing ERM frameworks, you got AI risks, you got the mitigants, you got all that information that comes from the MIT AI risk repository. And then finally, as we've seen with the triangle there, tech dynamics require an agile risk management approach. That means you can be fairly lean, but you need to be able to adapt quickly. So in a traditional bank, you would have a credit risk manager. They only do credit risk, nothing else. You would have a market risk manager. You would have a liquidity risk manager, and so on. In this space, it needs to cut across horizontally and vertically when you want to manage AI risk sufficiently. Which then brings me to conclude, I call this enterprise-wide AI risk management because I think it's the best way of describing what's in my head, and I want to get it out here. It's needed to survive and to ultimately succeed. And the reason I'm saying this is a comment I made in a panel this morning. From a risk manager's perspective, yes, organizations that were about money, making money, get more customers, and so on. From a risk manager's perspective, everything should be about the key strategic objective of the organization, and there's two actually. The first one is survival, and the second one is survival with a long-term sustainable profit for a corporate, benefit for an NGO, academic institution, or anything else that is more focused on social good. That brings me to a conclusion. I would like to thank both RiskEurope and each and every one of you for joining me this afternoon.